Hello and welcome to another update where I cover the latest developments from the front line in the war in Ukraine. Starting out in the Avdiivka front, the Ukrainian forces have managed to recapture parts here to the west of Kamyanka, reaching the river line and the village here without a name on Google Maps, but I remember it had a name signing was S. Whichever it is, the Ukrainian forces have advanced slightly here in the fields below it and are moving both upwards and eastwards in this direction, both towards Kamyanka as well as the southern parts of Krasnoorivka, as they try to regain some of these positions that are pressuring the Ukrainian forces here in the city of Avdiivka, since the Russian forces are in a position where they attack supply lines in and out of Avdiivka, as well as their full control over all the villages to the east of Avdiivka, which allows them to concentrate troops and focus mostly on artillery towards the city rather than moving and fighting head on. Then we have some updates from the Bakhmut city. First off, we have the Ukrainian forces. There was a map correction by Syriac Maps where he corrected the part here west of Bakhmut to still be under Ukrainian control, especially here the forest lines, which allows the Ukrainian forces to hold these positions here to the west of the city as they try to do some reconnaissance missions as well as possible sabotage within the city. They can use this to enter the city mostly unnoticed through the forests covering their positions. However, the difficulty here is that it is such a small area, which would mean that the Russian forces would expect them to come from there rather than anywhere else. At the same time, we see here to the southwest of the city that their driving school is still in the gray zone, which may be why we had some issues on the Russian side. If they just had the driving school, which would allow them to educate more drivers, which would allow them to send messages through the two post offices in Bakhmut, they would easily be able to avoid the whole conflict within Russia. But since the driving school is still in the gray zone, they weren't able to, and that is the main issue, which makes it difficult for armored columns to drive through and launch offensive operations here in this part of the front line. What we have seen is that, for example, there is this video here from the Vremevsky Ledge, which is here by the river line south of Velika Novosilka. In this video, we see a Ka-52 helicopter attacking Ukrainian positions. So we see a continuous attempt by Ukrainian forces to still advance even through the bad weather, and they keep getting apprehended by Russian Air Force, especially the Ka-52 helicopters, but also the artillery and so on. Other than that, we have an update from the Kreminna area where the offensive operations of the Russian forces have largely stopped, and the main fighting is currently happening in the Serbryansky forest area south of Kreminna, where both the Russian and the Ukrainian forces are attacking back and forth here in this area, as the Ukrainian forces are trying to recapture the lost positions, and the Russian forces are especially trying to attack here to the south of Dibrova to try and capture some further positions in the forest line and try to cut off the Ukrainian forces within it to prevent further supplies from reaching them and capturing the full forest line. Then we move back to the Zaporizhzhia front, where we here see the Ukrainian forces' continued attempts at attacking in the direction of Lubkove and Pyatkhati. And from this, we see there is this video here. In this video, we see a tank here by a forest patch. Not exactly sure where this is, most likely here in the Lubkove area. Then we see a drone taking footage of this tank, and then the tank getting hit by an artillery strike. So what we see is that the Ukrainian forces continuously attack and try to advance on the Russian positions. Whenever they lose their vehicles and retreat due to it getting demobilized or other things which prevent them from retrieving the vehicle, then the vehicle is stuck and the Russian drones fly over them, detect them and destroy them to prevent them from being recovered and repaired, which this video is one of such cases. And then finally, there is this video here of a Russian T-80 BVM tanker fighting and firing at a range of 9,500 meters, 9.5 kilometers, approximately 6 miles. and they are able to shoot their bullets, to shoot their cannon at this range because they have drones that correct the fire. They try to pull an estimate as to where they would hit, where they would aim if they wanted to hit. They shoot, it hits nearby, the drone corrects, and then they hit it. So essentially, with the drones reconnaissance force that we have in modern warfare, most of these ranges for different weapons like the tank and so on are able to significantly increase, because the main issue was that the line of sight simply didn't allow them to shoot that far. But now with drones it's much easier and it allows for much more accurate fire. Finally, there's one more topic we have to cover, and that is the remaining 80% of the Ukrainian forces not committed yet to the offensive. Over the past few days, a lot of Western countries have been questioning this offensive, as they see that although there are a few villages captured, this is nothing like what anyone from the Western experts had expected about this offensive. They expected the Ukrainians to just steamroll the Russians, push through the defensive lines, and reach the Sea of Azov within 5 minutes. But it turns out that they aren't doing that, so they are asking a lot of questions. And the Ukrainian Minister of Defense kept saying, you have to wait until the main push. When the main push comes, it will be obvious, it will be evident, and you just have to wait until you see. So when is this main push, and will it be as successful as Western experts think it will be? Let's dive into that. Starting out, we have to think about what 20% of the Ukrainian forces have managed to achieve. They've actually managed to reach the first few villages, capture a few of them, and specifically south of Oryhiv, they reached Robotyne, and they have captured a few fields to the north of it. However, something to keep in mind is that most minefields are located near the front line, as these are positions the Russians don't expect themselves to drive through. If they want to place further minefields, then they would have to put them behind their own forces, which would be very difficult, which means that they can only place the next minefield after their own forces have retreated. So most likely we will see the minefields only appearing by the first parts of the front, before the first line of defense, and there will be few minefields beyond that. There could be some prepared, and except in some areas by the main roads where the Russian forces can retreat through and just avoid the general minefields, and then place the mines behind them as the last few people retreat. That is also a possibility, and that may very well happen. However, those roads will have hastily prepared mines, which means that the Ukrainian forces could essentially just burst through it, especially if they have high momentum. Then we have other parts of the defensive line. We have anti-tank ditches, we have shark teeth, we have a lot of different aspects, but all of these can be broken through with sheer force. What is giving the Russians the most success right now is that the Ukrainians are simply doing in an attritional way. They are slowly pushing, testing the Russian defenses, which allows the Russians to just concentrate their fire in these different positions, which allows them to just inflict heavy casualties on the Ukrainian forces. However, if the Ukrainians gather their forces in a specific spearhead, then that will completely make it a different situation. The Russians have to rapidly respond to that by gathering their own forces and concentrating their own forces, which will allow them to match the Ukrainian forces concentrated in one area. Which means that generally, if the Ukrainians launch a spearhead, for example, south of Oryhiv, then the Russian forces would need to gather their own forces to meet them. However, this does not align with their military doctrine. As long as Gerasimov is in charge, his doctrine is if the Ukrainians advance, then they should retreat and essentially fight at better positions. However, it is clear that there are specific areas that the Russian forces really need to hold, otherwise their entire defensive line could essentially collapse. Therefore, it is most likely that the Russian forces will try their best to hold these defensive lines, and if the Ukrainians break through some parts of them, they'll most likely try to organize a retreat to the further back defensive lines or establish positions where they can essentially prepare defenses in their second line of contact, second defensive line, combined with the first defensive line to prevent a loss of huge amounts of territory. But most importantly, we have these circled cities, which are the most important ones. the Ukrainian forces really want to capture these specific areas, as they are very important when it comes to the logistic supply of their own offensive. It doesn't matter if they can break through and reach the Sea of Azov if they do not have supplies to keep their positions and hold them in these areas, which means that the Ukrainian forces need to capture these important areas if they are able to sustain their offensive, which means that the Russian forces essentially have two primary objectives. The first one is to hold the defensive lines. The second one is to reinforce and protect these important villages and cities around the Zaporizhia region. So what exactly will happen? What will the outcome be? It will be very difficult to tell, since I do not know the exact power balance. But essentially, it looks like the Russian forces are well prepared for this. The Ukrainians, although they are also well prepared and expect the Russian defenses to be as heavy as they are, as they have now done a lot of probing attacks, they do not have the necessary firepower and air force to conduct a successful offensive. So it looks to be in favor of the Russian forces, but still anything can happen in war. So we have to wait and see. And that is going to be all for this update. Thank you all for watching and have a great day.